All right, all right. Welcome everyone to Sabs podcast. I'm your host, sabrinasalvati. My special guest tonight is Christian Parenti. He is a journalist and an economist. Welcome back, Christian. So nice to have you back on.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me back.
Awesome. So I want to get started with, I know we're going to talk a little bit about the 2024 election, but I do want to get started with a recent article from you from February where you said, will the left stand up to the deep state? And I want to dive in here on this paragraph where you start to mention the FBI. You said the Bureau has a history of targeting figures and groups it sees as real political threats. Dr. Martin Luther King, for example. But it also has a well-documented history of fabricating political enemies where none exist. Throughout its history, the FBI has used both real and concocted threats to expand its budgets, powers, and prerogatives. And I know you started off this article talking about the weaponization of the federal government. And I want to start off with that first. I have noticed, and I'm sure you noticed this too, that's why you wrote this article, I have noticed that when it comes to government agencies, the FBI, the CIA, it seems like the squad members or the so-called progressives that are in Congress, they are not willing. It seems like they're not willing to call out those government agencies. And now it seems like there are certain segments of the right that have taken that mantle, so to speak, like a Matt Gaetz, that are willing to call out the weaponization of the federal government. And I want to get your opinion. Why do you think that's happening? And what does that mean for the left in the future?
Sure. Well, I mean, I think it all is rooted in Trump derangement syndrome. And this was this is an idea that I guess, at first I didn't take that seriously. Trying to figure out the deeper logic of stuff. But increasingly, I feel that people really do, on the left, suffer from a kind of derangement, a panic, a hysteria about this guy. And that is rooted in a lack of actually, critically appraising his record vis-a-vis the Biden administration, what you get from the Democrats. And I mean, ultimately, I think they're basically both bad. They're both awash. But, the fear is that Trump is an actual fascist, that democracy is at stake, and therefore all of these old concerns go out the window because there's an emergency, and the emergency never stops, even though Trump's now out of office. Right? The emergency requires circling the wagons and overlooking problematic facts, such as that the FBI very clearly had infiltrated the various right-wing street gangs that were involved in Charlottesville and in January 6th. And they had them so thoroughly penetrated that you then have to ask the question, well, wait a minute, why wasn't more done to prevent these horrific spectacles, particularly Charlottesville, right? It's like, that was a horrific, ended up in this like murder and injury of 19 people. But, in both cases, it's like, it's hard for me at least to believe that that it was merely oversight and bureaucratic incompetence that led to inadequate police response in the face of both these spectacles. Now, these spectacles play a very important role in the current political imagination. This is the horde that's being held back by the mainstream Democrats. Like, this is the threat that causes the left to just forget the fact that, wait a minute, if we allow the FBI to do this to anyone, they're also going to do it to us. And they mostly have done it historically to the left, right? So when there's a time like now where there's this committee on the weaponization of the federal government, right, and Republicans are in the lead on this, the Democrats are not cooperating and trying to actually bring some sanity and restraint to these police agencies, particularly the Bureau. Instead, they're actively defending the Bureau and its unaccountable rogue ways and attacking the Republicans. And that is because I think that, the imagination of the left, from the center left on over, is hostage to this phantasmagoria that Trump is a fascist and that we're really just, a breath away from from the collapse of democracy. And the great irony is that it's precisely that fear and the concessions made to the political center by the left that seem to be increasing actual authoritarianism at every level. I mean, this was particularly true around COVID, right? It's like, this is apolitical, this is surveillance, and the left does not want to deal with that. Is my internet connection dropping?
I think you broke up a little bit.
Okay. Hopefully it'll be okay. I think there was other.
I think you'll be okay. One thing I was going to add too is I think in history as well, we have to go back to, I know you mentioned MLK, but also the Black Panthers were also infiltrated by the FBI. And you would think more people in Congress would be willing to call this out. And what's dangerous about this, when you have people like a Matt Gaetz or Jim Jordan, so to speak, that are willing to call out these agencies, it gives people the impression that the right now has the correct message when it comes to weaponization of the federal government, and that the Democratic Party is actually more willing to embrace the establishment.
It does. And that's problematic because people who come to a critical political consciousness start looking for forces that are critiquing and pushing back, and they see, oh, it's the right wing. It's these guys, they stand for liberty. And the Republicans do hold the high ground in terms of pushing back against the national security state and around defending free speech. But of course, they've got a terrible record on the environment, terrible record on workers' rights, and they're totally committed to the upward redistribution of wealth. So the great risk is that you have a whole bunch of rebel sentiment emerging and being siphoned off to the right. Yeah, it's a huge problem. And absolutely right. The FBI had infiltrated the Black Panthers. I mean, Fred Hampton, who was in many ways the most Marxist and most explicitly, socialist in his analysis. I mean, it was an FBI infiltrator who drugged him the night of the Chicago police raid when the Chicago PD opened fire in that apartment and killed him while he lay drugged asleep in his bed, right? So it's like the FBI in that and other cases were instrumental in the murder of political leaders. And Fred Hampton was a kid, right? I forget his age, but it was like he was under 25 or something. It's like, where would American culture be if he had been allowed to mature and continue working and evolving and speaking and educating? You just do the math on the number of people that were lost during COINTELPRO by FBI efforts, and you start thinking that's a really serious and a very detrimental impact on our political culture and our political capacities as a people.
Well said. I want to get into the 2024 presidential election. I'm sure you've heard a lot of rumblings about this. Recently, this journalist from the Washington Post, now Case Study QB clipped this, shout out to Case Study, David Ignatius, actually released an op-ed that says Joe Biden should not run for re-election. I agree with him 100%, but I want people to hear what he said here on Morning Joe. I think this is sending off a lot of alarms, particularly to the Democratic Party, especially since it came from an outlet like the Washington Post, one of the really big mainstream outlets. Everyone, listen to what he said.
I think it comes down to what we were talking about earlier. Is Joe Biden the person who can stop Donald Trump or somebody like Trump who gets the Republican nomination? That's what he's got. He's got to look in the mirror, search his soul, and make that decision. And I wanted to raise that question. I'd like him to think that through carefully because I have my concerns. Well,
okay, I want to stop it there, and I want to get your take on this, Christian, as well. Given Joe Biden's cognitive ability at this point in time, he's having difficulty pulling words together, walking, he's falling down. He doesn't know where he's supposed to be at these press conferences. And it's very apparent to people that there is something going on there. Do you agree with David that he should not run for reelection? I'm sure your opinion may be a little bit different from the opinion that he gave as to why he should not run. Do you agree that Joe Biden should not run up for reelection, and why?
Well, I mean, at this point, I'm so I did vote for Joe Biden last time. I did vote for Biden last time. The time before that, I voted Green. But I honestly, I don't really care. I don't really care which party becomes president. That's how I feel now. I think it's almost a wash. It's like you've got the war that Biden has pursued. This is horrible. The war is an environmental policy. It is a labor policy. It is an education policy. The opportunity costs of sending at least 113, possibly up to 176 billion dollars to Ukraine. The opportunity costs are enormous here, right? The left doesn't seem to care about that. The way the Democrats have clung to their belligerent, anti-worker, bullying COVID policies. Less than a month ago, a bill came up to reinstate a bunch of airline pilots who had refused to take the jab and lost their jobs, and the Democrats wouldn't let them back, right? Even though there's a pilot shortage. So, there's all sorts of terrible things that Joe Biden has done. He ended the eviction moratorium, which Trump, it was, first of all, it was in the CARES Act. Then it was extended by Trump through executive orders. Biden could have extended that. He didn't. He ended the student debt pause. That was initiated by Trump by an executive order. Biden he's helped rebuild the EPA, which is good. He added $1 billion to it. So it's got a $10 billion budget. But at the same time, in his first 2 years, he has issued more oil and gas leases than Trump did. It's almost about the same, 6,900 versus 6,200 for Trump. But, you add it all up. I mean, Trump had horrible labor policies, stacked the NLRB so that its rulings were basically whatever the Chamber of Commerce wanted. His environmental policies were awful. So I'm not saying Trump was better, but it's kind of a wash, really. So I don't really care, to be perfectly honest. I'm feeling very, very cynical and pretty angry towards the Democrats. Now, speaking at, putting on the racehorse, what should they do? I suppose, yes, I suppose they should get rid of Biden, because he is quite old, and he does seem to be cognitively impaired. I resisted that for a long time because he seemed to be doing a pretty good job. There would be clips of him bumbling around, and then there'd be clips of him where he had enough Provigil and a good night of sleep or whatever, and he could really articulate his points and bring it. But 80 years old is pretty old. It's a pretty exhausting regimen. So I think they're maybe realizing that they need to have him, replace him. But I don't know. Who knows? Who knows if Biden will go along with it? And then there's also the fact that this is another thing the left has totally denied, totally to the level of hallucinatory nonsense, denied the reality of Hunter Biden's laptop, right? For the longest time, some pretty critically minded left-wing activist type friends of mine were denying that this was real until the Washington Post and the New York Times finally admitted, okay, the laptop is real. Well, the laptop is real, and never mind the sex and cocaine on there. It's about the emails and business dealings. And there's a lot of circumstantial evidence that Hunter Biden was influence peddling and making a lot of money trading on his father's name. And that is not going away. That can't just be swept under the rug. It was for the last election. The story of that laptop is Hunter Biden leaves, Hunter Biden has a horrendous wound and trauma as a kid when his mother dies and his sister dies in a car accident. Later in life, he's sober for 10 years. Then his brother dies tragically of brain cancer. And at that point, he falls off the wagon and he goes on a bit of a rampage. And amidst that rampage, he leaves his laptop at a repair shop in Wilmington, Delaware, and doesn't come back for it. And he signs a contract that says if you abandon this laptop, it's ours eventually. The guy who owns a laptop repair shop made numerous documented attempts to get in touch with Hunter Biden to give him this back. And he opens up the laptop, and once it's finally his, the repair shop's possession, and he realizes, whoa, this is Hunter Biden's laptop, and he gets freaked out. So he tries to give the laptop to the FBI. They reject it. His father tries to give it to the FBI. They reject it again. Then finally, they accept the laptop in January. I think it's around January. Maybe it's in the early spring of 2020. So this is in 2019. He's been trying to give them this laptop. When they're rejecting it, he's like really freaked out about what this means. So he gives a copy somewhere along the line to Rudy Giuliani. The FBI come, they take the laptop from this guy, Mac Isaacson. They tell him people who keep their mouth shut about this, generally nothing happens to them. Giuliani has a laptop and he thinks, whoa, this is our October surprise. He gives the contents of the laptop to Miranda Devine at the New York Post. Miranda Devine begins writing articles about this. In the meantime, through 2020, the FBI and other agencies of state, through the Aspen Institute, through nonprofits that not have any fingerprints on it, starts convening meetings with social media and the legacy media to say, hey, we have reason to believe that there is going to be a Russian disinformation operation that's about disrupting our elections, and it's going to involve claims that Hunter Biden lost a laptop, et cetera, et cetera. So you need to be aware of this. We're not telling you what to do. You guys are patriots. You figure it out. So when Miranda Devine's stories come out in September of 2020, the New York Post's Twitter handle is shut down for a while. The whole story is killed. So, I mean, this is the FBI indirectly intervening in the election. Okay, were the Republicans playing dirty tricks? Yeah, it's an October surprise. Want to play dirty? Great. Okay. But it's like the organs of state power, it would seem, intervened in that election. So they were successful that time around, but this time they realized they can't do it. The other thing that's happened, which is crazy, is that Hunter Biden had this plea deal arranged around a gun charge and tax evasion. And embedded in that plea deal was immunity that extended to all sorts of other potential and known issues arising from the laptop. And the judge was so freaked out by this that she asked the prosecutor, have you ever seen anything like that? He said, no, I haven't. And she was unwilling to certify to go along with this plea deal. So the plea deal fell apart. The plea deal has fallen apart. Hunter Biden is apparently digging in, and he has now been, just like today or yesterday, indicted on federal gun charges. He's saying, and from what I've read, I don't know if this is true, but what I'm reading, is that he's apparently like he wants to go to trial, and they might even call Joe Biden as witness. So like with that whole story in the background, that plus Joe Biden's cognitive decline. Yeah, I could imagine if I was a Democratic strategist, I'd be concerned that wouldn't go so well for Joe, and maybe we should replace him. Because also the thing with dementia, senility, getting old, whatever it is, you never know what this stuff is, and sometimes people can hold steady, just kind of like not as sharp as they were, and it goes on for years and years. But sometimes people can have rather rapid, precipitous decline. So I think they also are worried that they don't know what will happen necessarily with Joe Biden. Maybe Joe Biden can hold it together. Maybe he'll be exactly the way he is now, which is like, okay, the guy's old, but he can also still make a speech. He can still hold it together. Maybe he'll be like this in here, but maybe he'll be in much worse shape. And if that's the case, then that could be very serious. So yeah, I think they're kind of they've got a problem. And they're throwing all these charges at Trump. 91 charges, 4 indictments. And the guy's mugshot looks like a professional photographer took it. This is like, what are we in somebody's novel? This is crazy, isn't it? It's like, this is like a movie where it's like the Teflon invincible bad guy, his mugshot, where like, this is it, man. We've got him. This is the scalp we take to humiliate the other side. And then it's like, instead, like the next day, Trump is selling it and swag and using it. So I think that got them spooked. They realized this stuff is not working. And they've almost jumped the shark a little bit, because it's like, what kind of person who's on the fence is going to be able to dig into 91 charges, 4 indictments? It's like, man, that's a huge research project right there. So, I mean, I think the effect is just like, it's just, they oversold what? And then like the Biden gun charge, and then all this stuff about these deals, and they'll start quoting the emails and to a wider and wider public, 10% for the big guy, and pretty soon there's a lot of swing voters who are just going to be like, once again, it's a wash, whatever, they're all corrupt. I'll vote for one of them, or I won't vote for either of them, and so the whole campaign of lawfare against Trump by the Democrats threatens to be a wash or worse. It could backfire.
That's a good thing you said. I think that one of the things that has caused a lot of controversy on the left was recently, or actually it was like 2 months ago, I think now, AOC actually came out on Pod Save America and said that she would be endorsing Joe Biden. So for a lot of people that are progressives, they were very upset with AOC because there are people running against Joe Biden. There's Marianne Williamson, who is running on progressive issues. She is for Medicare for all. Joe Biden is not. There's also RFK Jr., different platform from Marianne Williamson, but then there's also Cornel West, right? So, in this interview, AOC was vehemently opposed to a third-party challenge, and to Cornel West, said she respects him, but she doesn't think that he should do this. Other progressive have fallen in line and said the same thing. Then there was an article that was released by Freddie DeBauer that said AOC is just an old Democrat now. And that article actually stirred up a lot of buzz or rift, so to speak, within like the left community, so much so that Freddie went on to different podcasts to talk about it and why he wrote the article, gave specific examples. There was a counter to that from Jacobin. They wrote an article saying, here's all the great things that the squad members have actually done, but it was really more so a defense for AOC. And I want to ask you, first and foremost, why do you think some of these squad members who ran on Medicare for all and these progressive policies, why do you think they're supporting Joe Biden instead of those candidates that are running on the progressive issues like Marianne Williamson or Dr. West? Dr. West.
Well, I think it's because of Trump derangement syndrome. I think it's because they have either convinced themselves that Donald Trump threatens fascism, or because they are hostage to an audience and a set of constituencies that believe this. And they worry that if they don't appear to be in lockstep behind Joe Biden, that, their followers will turn on them. So I think it's some combination of that. And it's bad strategy. Why give it all away right up front, right? Why not at least wait and try and get at least some flimsy verbal concessions from Biden that he's going to do something for you? I mean, why? And this was like months ago that AOC, was it in May or April or something like that, she endorsed Biden? I mean, what's the point of that? Bernie did it. Ilhan Omar was the first to do it. And Katie Porter, I guess Rashid Tlaib has not yet. I don't know, but I mean, it's silly, it's not good strategy, but I think that's what it is. I think it's just this panic. And that's unfortunate because, we saw what Biden did. Actually, Ben Burgess in Jacobin had a good article about this, about critical of AOC's early endorsement of Biden. And he went through, all of the betrayals that Biden gave Bernie nothing. He's given the social democratic left nothing, right? he was talking about a public option. Forget Medicare for all. Forget it. He's talked up a public option. As soon as Bernie folded, he was like, public option out the window. The one piece of Bernie's plank he took was $15 an hour minimum wage, and then that went away too. So, you know, he has. I mean, he's not in favor of the PRO Act. He's nothing for that. I mean, he has made better appointments to the NLRB. And you know, a few little things here and there around labor. And as I said earlier, you know, he has increased the budget of the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, and rebuilding that agency is important. The EPA does good work. That Nixon era agency and the Nixon era laws that it enforces have done a lot to clean up the environment. But basically, he's done nothing for the social democratic left. So I don't know why they endorsed him early.
There's something that happened recently. Bernie Sanders has gone on a press tour to different shows, basically advocating for why people should come out to support Joe Biden. As we all know, Bernie Sanders is a registered independent, but he usually, caucuses with the Democratic Party and defends the Democratic Party. One of the questions that came up is, how does Bernie Sanders feel about Dr. West running third party, running through the Green Party? And of course, the media knows that they're friends, so they brought that up. How do you feel about your friend, right? Bernie Sanders' response was, yeah, I don't think he should do it. I think this is a mistake. So this really pushes back against this idea of this political revolution that Bernie Sanders was talking about. Like, we saw we could not have a political revolution through the Democratic Party because they will either rig the primaries like they did in 2016, or they'll get outside players like Barack Obama to do what he needs to do, to tell people to drop out of the race, etc. So my thing is, we need to break away from the duopoly. Now, I know third party isn't going to be easy. We pretty much predict like third party candidates are not going to be able to win in 2024 because of the barriers that are in place. But the goal that I see is to get to that 5% so that they can get the federal funding. Then if you get to 15%, then you're on the debate stage. So I think this is a way to start a movement, so to speak, a third party movement to break away from the duopoly. I'm curious to hear from you. Do you believe that Bernie Sanders really feels that there should not be a third party run? Or do you feel he's saying that because Democrat leadership has told him to try to stop this so that there isn't another presidency of Donald Trump? And then also, how do you feel about the possibility of a third party movement in Cornel West's campaign?
I think Bernie is terrified of Donald Trump, and I think this is probably genuine, that he does not want a third party run. When Bernie, in my home state, there is a whole third party, the Progressive Party in Vermont, and Bernie always kept them kind of at arm's length, and did not become a member, and didn't do that much to help build that. But it was his example that really showed the way for the Progressive Party. And the Democratic Party hated Bernie Sanders in Vermont. I mean, the level of hatred for Bernie Sanders in Vermont among Democrats is something you have to see to believe. And so I think all that has just worn him down, and that the main thing is that he's that spectacle of January 6th, the spectacle of Oath Keepers and Proud Boys, these thugs, that really, that's embryonic fascist militia there, right? So if you overlook the fact that they were all totally penetrated by the police, and that they could have shut down the January 6th riot before it got into the Capitol. If you don't want to get into any of that stuff, then it's like, I can see how you'd become totally terrified and suffer from Trump derangement syndrome. So I think that's what's up with Bernie. And then the other thing is, Bernie's always had his faults. I mean, he's been bad on foreign policy all along. My father and Bernie Sanders were close friends. and they broke over foreign policy. And I mean, Bernie Sanders remains bad on foreign policy. He has voted for war credits to Ukraine. I mean, this is, I think this is totally outrageous. And I don't approve of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, but I'm not going to pretend that the US did not bait Russia into that, okay? I'm not going to pretend that there aren't actual Nazis in the Ukrainian armed forces, right? And I'm not going to pretend that this isn't a proxy war with an atomic power that feels totally threatened by what we're doing. And we have this cast of Democrat hawks in DC who it seems like have no sense of the danger of that the fire they're playing with. And they're all going to be out in 4 years and on the board of Raytheon or whatever. It's like they're being incredibly reckless and dangerous with this. There could be atomic war. Short of that, there's the largest nuke plant in Europe, Zaporizhzhia, is on the front lines, right? I mean, Chernobyl melted down. Okay, it's a different model. It's not a graphite plant, blah, 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 blah. What, it's got better containment shells and stuff. But if Zaporizhzhia melts down, who's going to send 270,000 liquidators, as the Soviet Union did, to cover it in cement and lead, So that war is extremely dangerous and it needs to stop. I agree with Donald Trump, where he says, like, the killing has to stop. It's got to stop now. And that's not to say Russia's right or any of that. It's just like, this has to stop. And Bernie is doing nothing on that front. And AOC is doing nothing. None of the squad are doing anything. And, I really think that negates everything else. As my good friend Jason Moore said, he's like, I'm quoting him without quoting him, but yeah, that war, those war credits, that is your environmental policy. That is your education policy. You can't have it both ways. You can't say, I'm for a clean environment and I'm also for the war in Ukraine. It's like the largest single methane emission in history was a direct result of that war. Either the U.S. intelligence agencies or the Ukrainians on their own, but probably some combination of the two, blew up the Nord Stream pipeline. It seems very clear. I mean, why would Russia do that? They own the pipeline. Why would they blow it up, right? They could just turn it off. They had already turned off Nord Stream 2, claiming it was maintenance, right? They don't need to blow it up. That's the single largest methane emission in history. Methane is a CO2, heat trapping gas, 20 to 30 times more powerful than carbon dioxide. So, on and on and on. Yeah, so they're very disappointing, and I no longer put any stock in them. I mean, we're anything positive happening. We've got a lot of rebuilding to do, a lot of education to do.
For those who are not aware, so Christian's father, Michael Parenti, there was a video I saw from, I think this was a couple years ago, where Michael Parenti actually was asked about Bernie Sanders. And Michael said that he would actually characterize Bernie Sanders as more of a centrist. And that was interesting to me. That was the first time I heard someone say that, but he was pointing at, like, specifically, I guess, like his policy decisions, his decisions on foreign policy, like you were just talking about. I think people seem to have this impression that Bernie Sanders is anti-war. He's not anti-war. If you think about some of the way he's voted for legislation as well. But I think that's really good. You guys can look that up on YouTube. If you look up Michael Parenti discussion about Bernie Sanders, you'll see that it's an older video where he talks about his opinion of Bernie Sanders. I think that's important for people to see. It's important for people to see.
I have a dog in here that's freaking out because there's a fox outside. Hey, get out. And my father, who is 90, he ran for Congress on the Liberty Union Party in Vermont. And Bernie Sanders had started running kind of as like a stunt in the early 70s. And my father ran in 74, I guess it was, or I forget when, 76, maybe it was 76 actually. And basically doubled the vote share that the Liberty Union Party got from, like 2 or 3% to like 7-8%. And he did it in part by cutting his hair and putting on a tie and jacket. and and going around and speaking to working class people like they were going to vote for him, and talking straight class politics to people. And it was the surprise, at least according to my father. Maybe he's sees it through his own rose-colored glasses, but his version of the story, he's Bernie, is that it was like the success he had with this one run, and also his own pressure, suggestions to Bernie. I mean, they were very close friends. They would hang out. That he would say to Bernie, "You should get serious about this. This is more than just a kind of like yippee style stunt. Like, you could actually become mayor of Burlington." And then, of course, Bernie did, and ran. I think it took him 2 or 3 times to run for mayor of Burlington, seriously. And then he became mayor of Burlington. He did a fantastic job as mayor of Burlington. He shut down Church Street, which is this like totally gentrified promenade. And I remember telling young radicals in Burlington, I was like, "Yeah, Bernie Sanders did that." They were like, "What? Bernie did that?" Like, I was like, "Yeah." And all the stores, all the local business people were like, "You can't suppress traffic in downtown Burlington. It'll kill business." Did the exact opposite. He got a minor league baseball team to come in. He was a great executive. Then he finally runs for Congress, becomes congressperson, then a senator, and then he starts voting on foreign policy issues and reveals his real limits by voting. I forget all of them. I forget how he voted on the Iraq War, but I know he voted for the bombing of Yugoslavia under Clinton. He voted for the '94 crime bill, and hid behind the fact that there was money for midnight basketball programs in it and stuff like that. So yeah, Bernie has his limits, always had, and still does.
Christian, how do you feel about local actions? Because one of the things that I have been telling people is that eventually campaign season is going to end. Everybody's really excited and geared up now because we're in election season heading into 2024. But what I typically tend to see is that after the election is over, people tend to go back to sleep, especially if their candidate did not win. And what I've been trying to get people to do is to focus on some of these local actions. Like, if you live in a ballot initiative state, Massachusetts is a ballot initiative state. So get involved in like ballot measures, like try to put forth ballot measures and get those signatures to put these things on the ballot so that people have more direct democracy. Organize with people within your community, do mutual aid. These are some of the things a lot of us over at Revolutionary Blackout Network, this is what we do. We organize within the community. But oftentimes what I've found is people will get excited about it and they'll want to do it. But the moment election season ramps back up, I feel like people check out of the organizing because they're focused on a candidate. What do you think is the best way for people to either try to do both, or do you feel that one is more important than the other?
Well, that's a tough question. I definitely agree with you. I think people should be involved in local action and organizing for a number of reasons. One, because you can get stuff done that's meaningful at a local level. And also people learn how to do politics by doing it at a scale that's graspable. I think that even though I have expressed deep cynicism about the Democrats in this conversation with you tonight, I do think that the left should keep the door open to elections. It's not that big a deal to vote. And, also running people at a local level is important, though, again, there's, the same kinds of problems emerge. I was involved in the anti-gentrification movement in the late 90s in San Francisco, in the Mission District where I lived at that time. And it coincided with the return of district elections. So what had happened in San Francisco was there were these district elections for the Board of Supervisors. San Francisco is the only city that's also a county, and it has this legislative body that's its main, governing body. And back in '78, a member of the Board of Supervisors named Dan White, who was both a former cop and a former firefighter, he quit because he couldn't make a living because they only were paid part-time. He kind of lost his mind, and he went back into City Hall with a pistol. He passed Dianne Feinstein in the hallway, who at that time was a supervisor, and he went to the office of the left-leaning mayor, George Moscone, and shot him dead. And then I think it was Moscone and then Harvey Milk, who was the first openly gay elected politician in America. What's interesting about that is Harvey Milk was also left wing. Harvey Milk ran against another gay candidate. So the thing about Harvey Milk, who was elected from the Castro, wasn't just that he was gay. The other guy was gay. He was also progressive. So Dan White shot both of them, and then Dan White was acquitted in what was called the Twinkie defense. He said he'd ate nothing but Twinkies for 2 weeks, and he went totally bonkers, and so he was exonerated or whatever, found not guilty. And there were these massive riots. Something like 12 police cars were burnt, and there was City Hall was attacked. And then the powers that be in San Francisco said, well, obviously district elections are too divisive. We're going to have citywide elections. So that meant it was harder for progressive neighborhood groups to get a candidate into the city government because you had to run citywide. And so that was the case until the late 90s. And then we finally got district elections back in place. And so the first district elections, a left slate did remarkably, swept. I remember a friend of mine named Chris Daly, who was a 27-year-old housing organizer, ran in the Tenderloin. That's the campaign I worked hardest on. And I remember a buddy of mine told me, oh, Chris Daly's going to run. I literally laughed out loud. I was like, it just struck me as totally ridiculous. Lo and behold, they put up a banker against Chris Daly in the Tenderloin, and Daly beat this guy I think it was 79-21, right? So there was a whole progressive slate got in there. Now, of course, there's limits to what you can do when you've got the power of capital in a place like San Francisco, but there was opportunities there. And I left shortly after that, so I stopped following it. I came back east in 2003, I think 2002, 2003. But yes, I think, local organizing, local elections, that's all good. And also, I don't really know. It's hard to say. I'm not a political scientist. I don't know what is supposed to work, and I don't know what, it's just, I think the one thing that's most important is we need a huge critical mass, and we need, people to be educated and radicalized. And I think that's what's really good about the kind of thing you're doing, this alternative media podcast, this sort of stuff. I mean, more and more people are coming to consciousness. And one of the big problems in our culture is anti-intellectualism, and the kind of work you're doing pushes against that and helps undo that. And that's one of the few really positive things I see is, this one of these pejorative terms that came out of the pandemic that just disgusts me is oh, don't do your own research. It's doing your own research, that's crazy. It's what? I mean, that's appalling. I mean, how arrogant, how elitist, how anti-intellectual can you be to tell regular people not to do their own research? We've got the documents. You don't have to read what the Washington Post says about some government report. You can get the report and read it yourself. People absolutely should do their own research. Now, are there dangers? Are some people who do their own research going to end up with crazy ideas? Yes, but people end up with crazy ideas regardless of doing their own research. So anyway, yeah. In other words, I do not have the answer what should be done, but I'm all in favor of local organizing, and I'm not, my current total disgust for the Democrats, including the squad, doesn't mean I don't think people should vote. It doesn't mean people should just turn their back on elections. It's not an either or thing. But I mean, definitely putting all your eggs in the basket of electoral politics does strike me as foolish.
Awesome. Well, Christian, thank you so much for coming on. Before you go, where can people find your work?
I've been writing for Compact Magazine most recently. I yesterday did a critical review, I should say, of Naomi Klein's new book, Doppelganger. She traffics in this kind of anti-intellectualism. And so, yeah, Compact, The Gray Zone, I've also been writing for. And, hey, the magic of the internet, you can just Google my name and you'll get all sorts of stuff from places I've written throughout the years, and books that I've written. My most recent book, Radical Hamilton, which is, it's American economic history. And that's also available as an audiobook for people who, have long commutes in automobiles and jog a lot or whatever. So, you know, the internet will tell you.
Awesome. Christian, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you. Keep up the great work.